and welcome to this demonstration of an asynchronous full migration. So we start with an integration workspace here, and in the developer workspace underneath it I've created an example view. I'll simply copied some standard applets, and I'm about to test these changes in the development environment, of course. Make sure they're correct. So I'm inspecting the development workspace here. And let's just make sure there is the example view. So that view exists now only in the development workspace underneath an integration workspace. And that's just the way we want it. So the next step is to deliver checkpoint, of course, first, checkpoint submit, and deliver that development workspace as you do. Okay, let's find some meaningful text for the comments, and off we go with the merge. This will merge our changes into the integration workspace. And we're done already, speeding things up a little bit here. So now we're ready to go for the migration proper. So in the migration application, I'm logging in here. I have already created a connection for the development environment. Let's quickly check out in SMC the migration profile I have used. So there is a REST endpoint. Mind that it doesn't end in a slash, common mistake, but you get that. And I'm not using the migration package location, so it's empty. That means the migration subdirectory of the enterprise's Siebel file system will be used. So let's visit that folder. That's the file system of my system. Here's the migration folder. I've run a few migrations over the years, and there's folders for each run. And in asynchronous migration, the zip file will be created here. So the connection is active, REST endpoint, just showing the setup here. And I have two migration plans already. I could reuse this one, the full RR export, or I could delete it. I'm not going anywhere. I create a new migration instead. Well, I'm looking up the existing one. It is on main 2. I could change that, but I don't want to really, so cancel out of here. So let's create a new migration plan. Enter meaningful name. So that's going to be a full RR export for this project. And the dev connection acts as the source always. And when you select Runtime Repository Data Service, you can select the main or integration workspace and version that you want. There's only one version really that we can export now from this integration workspace because it's brand new. And save that. And notice that the schema service and application workspace data service are both selected. You can't unselect them. They have to go with the full runtime repository migration. You could use other services too in this plan, but we are just running the bare bone full runtime repository export. So to execution we go and select our plan. No need to expand it really, unless you're interested, and hit the run button. So this will ask you to say OK, and it will ask you for the name of the zip file it's going to create. So let's find a meaningful name for that zip file. Okay, and it's off. We are running. You could stop that if you're on 22.5 or higher. Keep in mind that you're stopping the migration execution, but not any utilities that had already run off, like a repository export or so. You can click in 22.5 or higher any of these action buttons. It will refresh all the lines. And we see that some are still running, the long-running tasks, and a lot of things is going on in parallel. You can check the log files. So this is the log file of the LOV export. The application Workspace data service has exported the list of values related to this integration workspace. So it's the full set for that integration workspace. And we're going to speed things up here. If you are keen and interested in what's going on here, look at the task manager, or in Linux, your processes. You will find the typical command line utilities, ddldict, repimexp, dataexp, running as a result of this migration plan. So keep using one of these action buttons to refresh. Check the log files if you want, and eventually the steps will finish. So repository export is probably taking the longest time here. It's still running. And speeding things up here. Everything has been successfully run except the final step, the packaging. So 17 minutes and a bit for the repository export is not too bad. Notice that mandatory tables like stable are fully exported, and runtime, or well, any design tables are missing, like sapplet, s_applet. I'm looking it up right now. It's not existent. And any runtime repository tables, SRR, applet, for example, are also exported in full, because this is, of course, a full migration. But the design repository is never exported. So now it's finished. We can go to history, and showcasing 22.5 or higher has a query feature for a history. So you can find anything that contains, for example, your project name, and easier to locate a certain run. Also, you can delete entries here. So history is good. And there's the zip file in the migration folder of the file system, because we have not specified a package location. You can also inspect the run folder with the run ID. You can check out the log files here. You don't have to go through the migration application, download them. There are the DAT files, data export DAT files, schema files. Whatever resources you checked, you will find those files here. They will stay here until you delete them manually. Okay, we are switching to the future test environment. So this is a second Siebel environment where I have already created a connection, and I've copied over, or I'm about to copy over, the zip file from the development environment to this test environment. Because we're not using the migration package location, we have to copy the files to the migration folder of the file system of the respective enterprise. So now the zip file is here. There's no migration plan as of yet, so I'll create one, which goes by full RR import for the project, and test. The one connection I have in this environment is going to be the target. Now notice you can select runtime repository data service, but there's no choice of workspaces, etc. Because this is a target environment. And running the plan prompts for the zip file name. So make sure you have it in the correct location, and also for the schema owner password. So those database information you have entered in the connection, but the password you have to enter here. Password of the table or schema owner for the schema service stuff. So we set it off to run, and now of course we can monitor it the usual way using the refresh buttons, checking the log files, checking the processes on the environment. So whatever satisfies your curiosity. So here we see a database being quite busy, DDL imp running. That's the schema service applying the schema that comes from the development environment. All right. Yeah, let it run until it completes. We are speeding things up a little bit here. So now we see the runtime repository data service is running, is importing the repository. Check out the log files. Schema service gives us a log file here. So we can check out what happened. Those databases were identical copies of each other. So I'm expecting not much changes, but there is a few changes here, which is interesting, like indexes having been deleted and so forth. Maybe I had some custom indexes here, probably did. And the repository import, it takes as long as it takes. It will update the log file. The interesting part here is the command line, good old repimexp, but with a twist. Can you see it already? The repository name is migrated repository. So you will get a second repository. So now your environment is of course up and running. You have a Siebel repository. That repository that's now imported is a second one going by the name of migrated repository. Here I've made some SQL against sRepository, and we see it has a temporary name. That's normal for repimexp to rename that once it's finished. Okay, so repository is now imported, dbcheck is running, so we can see all the tables have been fully imported, and it took like 18 minutes, not too bad. And let's check out the repository names again. So now the migrated repository is here. So that's the one you want. So we will have to do some acrobatics in renaming those repositories. So almost there. The full CD import still running, could take a while. The last steps are related to the seed import. It exports the seed data that it finds, imports it again, imports the source data. So now it's finished, and we can check in the history. Everything was successful. And there are historical records now for our convenience. So, for example, check out the number of rows that have been imported in the list of values table. So at the moment we have two repositories. We also have two sets of list of values. One for the original and one for the migrated repository. So the next thing we do, preparing the environment, the target environment for a restart. So I'm stopping the environment here, stopping the enterprise literally through a script. And let's take a look at the post full migration tasks. So we are basically here about to rename the repositories, because that Siebel repository needs to be renamed and the migrated repository needs to become the Siebel repository. And renaming repositories has a history. If you're 21.9 or older, you have to use SQL against the database. If you're between 21.10 and 22.2, you have to use the siebdevcli with switch to migration repository. So make sure you check out the correct documentation. If you're on 22.3 and higher, siebdevcli it is, but with switch repository, different syntax. So let's see one approach to create that CFG file. I'll go to a machine where I have Siebel tools in my development environment, and I copy that tool CFG file. And I can paste it anywhere, but I choose the Siebel server bin ENU directory of the target test environment, one of the Siebel servers. And I rename the file to siebdevcli.cfg. And now it's a working Siebel tools files on a development environment. So I have to change it. Let's see what we need to do. So first of all, the client root directory, temp directory, that's not right anymore, so we have to change it. So here we go, that's the correct directory. Then it's about the database connectivity, and of course you need to make sure you reach the target server database, the runtime environment. So let's check out the ODBC 32-bit data sources on this environment. So here's the enterprise data source, name of the enterprise underscore DSN. So I'll use that. So the server ODBC data source, I'll use training underscore DSN, and data source I set as well. The trick is to have a data source with the exact name as the ODBC data source. So here's my training DSN data source, and I'm repurposing the server data source. The connect string for that database is fine. So I'm good to go. So we have, of course, to test that first. So here's an example string. So siebdevcli exe, it's similar to any Siebel tools command line, but with siebdevcli. And just running this does nothing. And it shouldn't do anything. It should just run for a while. And it's like Siebel tools starting up. But then siebdevcli looks for something to do, additional instructions, gets nothing, and stops itself. It leaves a log file though, so you can verify like this if your CFG file that you prepared is really valid. So here's the log file, and it just shows the usual stuff. It complains a bit about the server data SRC missing. Okay, let's repair that. Easy enough. So probably it's referred to somewhere else. Let's just copy that entry and let it have its server data SRC entry. Good enough. So one more test and we're good to go. So let's append SwitchRepository as our current Siebel repository. So it looks for this repository. It looks for the migrated repository, which will be renamed to Siebel Repository. And before that, the Siebel repository will be renamed to the old Siebel repository. So you run that complete command line. Again, this is the 22.3 plus version you're looking at here. Running here on 22.8. And that would take a few moments. And you will also notice it runs additional services and comes back. So the log file's not telling us much, but the S_repository table, that should be different now. So let's check out the names. Yep. Now the Siebel repository is old Siebel repository and migrated repository is Siebel repository. The enterprise is still shut down. We could start it now because there's a new Siebel repository in place, but we want to get rid of the old Siebel repository first. Now here's a little bit of additional information. If you ever run the post-install database utility against your environment, you will likely find post-install db setup CFG files in your log archives. And these files you can use for siebdevcli as well. You'll notice they have their respective parameters set correctly. They are generated automatically by post-install database by the utility. So you could use these files, if you find them, as an approach to generate your CFG file for siebdevcli if you wish. There's also, just for the sake of completeness, if you ran the repository upgrade, but then it's a development environment, you have to be aware of that. That also generates its own CFG files for siebdevcli, and you can use this. These are identical, more or less, to the post-install CFG files. So use these files as a starting point of creating your own working siebdevcli CFG file. All right, so just one more option. So now we have completed renaming the repositories. We have to delete the old Siebel repository and any related data. There we have to use the RRCleanup executable available on tools machines and Siebel server machines. And there's varying information about it, but I'll show you the safest way to run it. So if you run it from a Siebel server bin without any input, you get the arguments you have to provide. So you can put together your script file like so. So I'm choosing to run it from the Siebel server directory, RRCleanup executable, -t is the table owner username, -u is the runtime user, sadmin is fine, password for sadmin. Then it's ODBC, it's using ODBC data source. I can use that enterprise data source I have. And the name of the repository, -r, make sure it's old Siebel repository, because you don't want to delete the repository you just imported, right? And we have the path to the Siebel server installation folder. -b is the repository, -d is database type, -b is the repository type, uppercase B for both, deletes design and runtime repository data. So we make double sure we're deleting the correct repository. So now let's run this beast, and that will take a while. You probably know from previous deletions, deleting a repository takes time because it's a deep delete or a cascade delete. Here I'm just, because I was bored, I opened SQL Developer and I saw various delete statements from SRR so-and-so table where repository equals or name equals old Siebel repository. You can see this if you're watching what the database is up to, and you see big tables take longer to delete. So you have to wait it. You have to wait up for it, and will take as long as it takes. Okay, eventually it comes back and has finished. Now, the safest way to run this is run it again, no kidding, with an additional parameter, -a, yes. -a means orphans. Delete any orphan records. Now, documentation tells us the first should have been complete already, but running this a second time is just making sure we delete everything. So now, with only one repository and one set of LOVs, we are safe to start up the enterprise. We are not, there might be additional steps if you have, depending on your version, if you use Task UI, but in 22.8 there are no additional steps really. So the environment is started, and let's check out what happened. First, let's go to Workspaces. So that's now a test environment, and there's a main workspace version 0 as expected. So that's good. And notice it's called main, despite its source being an integration workspace. And of course, our test view is here. Responsibility has been administered to make sure we can see the view. So that's a successful full migration. Now let's test a incremental migration. So I'm back in the development environment and create a developer workspace underneath the integration workspace that I've just fully migrated to another environment. Going to make a few changes here. So first, a table change. I want to experiment with the schema service. So I choose the sorgx table, and I need to lock it because it's not workspace related at the time of this recording in 22.8. And just adding a custom column as you do to the table definition. And let's make this a variable character 50. So regular custom column. And don't forget to apply that. Okay. So should be all set. Just need the table owner. And we let Siebel Tools apply that. So of course that's the development database, which now has the new column definition, and we want to see that successfully migrated. So I'm exposing that new column in the account business component as a new custom field. No big surprises there. And I've added this field as a list column in my custom applet. So here I'm already inspecting the development workspace and see if the new list column appears in the list applet, and it does. I've added it at the end of the applet. So here's my custom column. Let's do a quick test. Can it write back to database? Yes, it can. Can we query on it? So the database column, new field, new list column combination is fully functional in the development environment. So the steps to complete this is delivering that developer workspace and increasing the version of the integration workspace. And now it's time to migrate this. Here we are back in the target environment and we get the watermark. We're doing an asynchronous migration. So clicking the watermark triple mustache icon on the tile, providing the name for the watermark file that will be produced. And then, of course, wait for it to be produced. So you have to pull the watermark from the target environment. You can do this like this. You will get a file in your file system migration folder on the target environment. Let's check out this file. So if you're curious, you can open it, but you'll probably close it right away because it's full of, well, whatever this gibberish is. Let's see what gibberish this is exactly. So copy the first gibberish line, and with JavaScript, for example, so I'm using the browser console, you can use a JavaScript function called A to B to decode that base 64 encoded string into the watermark string, which you can also get when you work with the business services. So notice that the name of the workspace is clearly given here. The source workspace name, the source start version, version 2 is the first version we're interested in. So this tells us basically this environment was created from integration test 0922 version 1. So 2 is the next best version, which would have changes. And there are other version numbers and timestamps there. So now we have to copy that file to the file system of the source environment, which I'm doing right now. So here I'm on the development environment. This watermark file must be available to the development environment. Grab the name, and now if you don't have it, create a new migration plan, like I do here. That's going to be incremental RR, export, asynchronous export from dev, and this time we choose incremental runtime repository data service, which will also enforce the schema service to be selected. Let's save this. So our new plan is here. Let's execute the plan. And it prompts for the file name, the zip file name that will be created. So let's put that name here. And it prompts for the watermark file. So you have to use the watermark file name that you copied over. Then click Get Workspace Details, and you see it resolves it. So the first best version you can export is 2 of that workspace. And when you click OK, this starts happening. So this will not take as long as the full export because we have fewer things to export. Still, we have to export the entire schema, but the incremental runtime repository export will be a tad faster. The usual bit of refreshing, we're already going to history, speeding things up here. So it was a successful run. We have a zip file. We can inspect the log files, check out what has been exported. Mandatory DR is fully exported, but runtime now only 2 applets. 2 because I got 2 language packs. So there's an applet definition for each language. Only modified 1 applet. So now I got the zip file and I have to copy the zip file to the target migration folder because we don't have a shared folder in this environment. So here on the target RR environment, copying the zip file to the migration folder, grabbing the name, And now I can run a migration. I need to create a plan first for incremental RR import. And test is my target. Same service, incremental RR. Let's run this plan. Okay, and it prompts for the zip file. Make the password is correct for the table owner, yes. So we're ready to run it. Okay. So the usual monitoring ensues. We're speeding things up here. Of course, takes a little bit longer, but not too long. You will be surprised how fast this is. The longest is the schema import because we had a schema change. If you have no schema changes, it's much faster. And because there's schema changes, we're quite interested what happens to the dictionary cache file. Will it be updated automatically? Let's see. So that file is like 2 hours old here from the first full migration import. We will expecting it to be updated once the process is complete. So the server components can pick up the schema from this, well, dictionary cache. Okay, let's refresh. Incremental runtime repository data import is running. Let's check out the schema log file. So in that log file, we should find a trace of our custom column. So there was one columns modified, it says, or edit, one column edit. There it is. Well, let's find it. So browser search to the rescue. That's too many. X underscore custom column. There it is. Edit one column to sorgx. So the schema change is there. Repository import still running. Won't take long. Now it's finished. And successful run in the history books. It runs db check as well because of the schema change. Here's the repository import, just 1 minute, or well, under 2 minutes. And the db check made sure that the dictionary cache file was rebuilt. Let's verify that. So indeed, it's an updated file now. So the file has been rebuilt. Okay, so now let's log into the application. Let's go to the Workspace dashboard first thing, and there's a new incremented version 1 of the main Workspace here because of our incremental run. And does it bring with it the changes? Let's check out our test view. And there's the custom list column in the applet. Yay! Can we successfully insert values and queries, so that would validate the entire chain. Yep, perfect. So there you have it. Full import followed by incremental repository import just for the fun of it. Thanks much for watching. Take care and bye-bye.